You were originally a special forces soldier. You unexpectedly transmigrated to the primitive society, becoming a small primitive of only 10 years old. Here, you not only have to endure 9 hungry meals every 3 days, you don't even have a pair of shorts, but you don't panic at all. With your experience from your previous life, establishing a foothold in this primitive society is a piece of cake. At this time, Grandpa Rat is cooking broth in a pottery pot and introducing the experiences and gains of this diplomatic mission to the elder. The more Black Rat Shaman listened, the more excited he became. A glint of gold flashed in his eyes unconsciously. He was going to take a trip with Ratdar himself. Inside the Han tribe, the temporary wall was completed. 3 meters high and nearly half a meter thick. The wall was enough to stop any human attack. The simple ice brick wall was built, and weapons for defense naturally had to be prepared. Most of the weapons the tribe had taken last time were bronze shovels. Although that thing could be used as a weapon, it could only be used for close combat. However, close combat easily causes casualties, so developing ranged weapons was the key. After thinking about it, a throwing spear was the most reliable. As long as it hits, it's definitely certain death. This way, before the enemy can get close, you can inflict as many casualties as possible. Before, the Han tribe's throwing spears were all wooden spears. The penetration was not enough, and they were not durable. But you now have hundreds of pounds of gold and silver plates. You just need to add a metal spearhead to the wooden spear. The production of this spearhead is also very simple. First, you make one yourself. Then you hand over the rest to Wood Bucket and Wood Village. The other tribesmen will help with the installation. By the 4th day, 260 new throwing spears had been produced. Now with the wall and the throwing spears, you finally have some confidence. This time, as long as there are no more than 20 people coming, the 60+ adults of the Han tribe can wipe out all the enemies with just one volley of throwing spears. This day happened to be the day to fill the brick kiln with water and seal the kill. There wasn't a single person outside the wall. Just then, Ratdar led his tribesmen across the small river, but couldn't find the Han tribe's cave, where there was an open space a few days ago. A white and green ice wall appeared out of nowhere. Ratdar quickly rushed to the ice wall. This wall wasn't here a few days ago. Did it come out of the ground? The rat shaman behind him also followed, looking at the identical blue bricks on the wall. He couldn't help but exclaim that it was simply a miracle. Meat Bun, who was playing inside the wall, was attracted by the noise outside. He ran like a wisp of smoke to the barrier at the entrance and looked out. Seeing the group of people who stabbed him with spears last time coming again, he immediately stuck his nose outside and roared. Ratdar then noticed that this wall also had a door that was a wooden frame. The outward-facing side was full of hard wooden spears. Although he didn't know what this thing was for, he could still imagine in his head the enemy rushing over and being stabbed to death by the spikes on it. He couldn't help but marvel. The women and boys were thinking about why the Han tribe didn't eat the 4-legged beast just now. How much meat would that be? At this time, you heard Meat Bun's roar, and walked out of the cave with a dozen tribesmen. Everyone was holding a no throwing spear. Ratdar quickly stated that he was here to exchange pottery, and pulled the women and children behind him to the front for you to see. You nodded, then had your underlings move the barrier. After Ratdar and his group entered, they were instantly stunned by the scene in front of them. Next to the pen, there were 30 identical carts parked. Next to the cave entrance, there were 50 copper shovels standing upright, and over 200 throwing spears. That row of neat spearheads gleamed with golden light. At the entrance to the cave, the door to the pen was still open, the blue horse grazing inside. Seeing strangers coming, immediately howled. Ratdar and the others were immediately startled. It turned out that the Han tribe, besides those 2 monsters, actually had so many blue horses, and they all lived in houses. Even after reaching inside the cave, Ratdar and his group hadn't recovered. Instead, they were even more surprised. Just by taking a casual glance, there were people everywhere. It looked like there were definitely no fewer people than the Black Rat tribe. The Han tribe's people were sizing up Ratdar and the others. Ratdar looked at the hundreds of pottery pots by the fire pit and his eyes flashed. How many were there? Enough to exchange for everything from their entire tribe. Several women from the Black Rat tribe were paying attention to the women of the Han tribe. They all had rosy complexions. It was clear that they weren't starving, and everyone had animal skins to wear. Only the Black Rat tribe's rat shaman had foresight. Constantly staring at the hundreds of Chinese characters on the rock wall in a daze. Seeing that this old man was interested in Chinese characters, you didn't disturb him. You told the elder to go trade with Ratdar first. This time, Ratdar brought 7 women, and 6 11 or 12-year-old boys, as well as 4 baskets of peanuts. He was prepared to exchange for 10 pottery bowls and 4 pottery bowls. After getting the pottery, Ratdar was very happy. From now on, his tribesmen could also drink warm broth. But what was even more gratifying was that these traded boys and girls, so that the Han tribe was very strong. They thought that in the future they could be like the others here, no longer go hungry, and were a little excited. After seeing that they had finished trading, the rat shaman hurriedly walked to your side and asked what those Chinese characters were. Instinct told him that those symbols were very advanced. Seeing that he was interested in Chinese characters, you took a small stick and carefully explained them to him. The rat shaman then understood that those symbols were another form of expression of the Han tribe's language. If everyone learned these symbols, wouldn't they be able to write some symbols for others to see? And others would know what they were saying. You didn't know what this old man was thinking. But seeing him deep in thought, you didn't disturb him. Don't look at the Han tribe's people learning Chinese characters every day. But it's all for those sugar syrup roasted chestnuts. Finding someone who can think and ponder like this is impossible. You also developed a love of money for a time. Even though this was just an old man from another tribe, you then took the initiative to invite Rat Shaman and Ratdar to stay for the night, so they could leave tomorrow. Upon hearing your invitation, Rat Shaman readily agreed. He also had many questions he wanted to discuss with you. To show your welcome, you announced that you would have an extra meal today. You could add a lunch, but the cave was a bit crowded. If everyone lay down to sleep, there definitely wouldn't be enough space. So, you prepared to move the rabbit pen to the open space outside the cave. To free up some space in the cave, after you chose a location, you had the tribesmen start work immediately, building 4 walls with green bricks. The ground was also completely paved and covered with a thick layer of dry grass. That was it. The women took the 50+ rabbits and carried them all to the pen outside. Rat Shaman took the initiative to ask why you didn't kill the rabbits. These were all food. Before you could answer, Big Tree rushed to explaining the purpose of raising rabbits. He had personally witnessed the first time the rabbits reproduced, going from 30 directly to over 50. Now raising rabbits was much easier than catching rabbits before. Everyone in the Black Rat tribe was very surprised. The principle of raising them was very simple. They all understood it, but they didn't expect that there was actually such a way to store food. Rat Shaman secretly speculated about the Han tribe's various wonders, and quietly pulled you aside, asking in a low voice who told you all these things. Was it your tribe's god? You directly told him that your tribe didn't have a god. You knew these things naturally. Hearing these words, Rat Shaman's gaze toward you changed instantly. Could you be a god? Ignoring his strange gaze, you took the group to visit the water field that was about to be transformed, proudly telling him that by next year, you would have an endless supply of food. Ratdar was a little confused. Although your tribe had more people than his, these people couldn't eat that much food. After wandering around for so long, he finally got to the point. You smiled and told him that you would invite other tribes to join the Han tribe and let more people become your tribesmen. Ratdar expressed disapproval of this answer. No tribe would be willing to join you directly. Hearing this, you smiled faintly and called Big Tree to your side, letting him tell them about their experiences, because Big Tree had personally experienced the cannibal tribe's invasion. The way he told it gave them a sense of being there themselves. Ratdar listened with cold sweat pouring down. He didn't expect there to be such a tribe. Fortunately, His tribe didn't encounter them. Seeing that the time was ripe, you dropped another bombshell. That cannibal tribe was just across the river. They had many adult men, and would never appear with less than 50 people, as well as many long-nosed monsters as big as Grey Mountain, who might not be far from your tribe. I hope you are careful. After saying this, you patted Rat D's shoulder, and turned to go back inside the wall, but Rat Shaman and Rat Dog were frightened by this news. Learning that the cannibal tribe was near their tribe, how could they stay comfortably as guests in the Han tribe? They immediately went to say goodbye to you, saying that they had to go back to prepare for defense. Since they were leaving, there was no need for you to keep them any longer. You gave them 10 large fish as food for the road. Before leaving, you also said to Rat Shaman that if they encountered danger, they could come here for help. Hearing this, Rat Shaman and Rat Dog were extremely moved, thanking you profusely, before hurriedly leading their tribesmen back to their tribe. With the departure of the group, the Han tribe returned to peace again, on the day before the third full moon of winter. It snowed heavily for a day and a night. The snow on the open space was 30 centimeters thick. The brick-making work was forced to stop. This day, you were lying on the haystack in the pen peeling chestnuts, with Meat Bun and Grey Mountain lying on your sides, stealing a few when you weren't paying attention. At this time, Grey Mountain suddenly raised his head, flapping his large ears and listening to the movements in the distance. You noticed something was wrong, and immediately stopped moving. In less than a minute, a violent tremor was transmitted from the ground. You rushed out of the pen, and climbed behind the west side of the wall to observe the situation. You saw at the forest line to the west, a hunting army composed of many carnivorous beasts, desperately chasing a herd of herbivores in the snow. In front, running for their lives, were not only herds of wild cattle you had never seen, but also large horned deer you had only seen in museums. Mixed in the middle of the team, there were even dozens of mythical alpacas, or llamas. The hunters chasing behind included not only tall terror birds, but also hordes of wild boars. The real main force of this army was a pack of grey wolves with a total of more than 200. You lay behind the wall, barely breathing, carefully observing the situation outside. Grey Mountain and Meat Bun also quietly lay on the side, watching the good show in front of them. At this time, a large number of pursuers were right behind them. The leading bull led over 100 of his little bull brothers, fleeing desperately to the northeast. The leading wolf behind them immediately howled, and over 100 vicious wolves quickly darted out from the wolf army, speeding like lightning to outflank the bull herd on both wings. Sensing that disaster was about to befall them, the alpacas in the fleeing army ran especially fast, one leading the way and rushing out of the bull herd, becoming the lead runner in this life and death escape. The 60-plus large-horned deer were not willing to be outdone, swinging their long legs and closely following behind the alpacas. The leading bull wasn't happy. If it weren't for the protection of the bull herd, those dozens of alpacas would probably have been taken down long ago. Now that disaster was imminent, they were running away themselves. At this critical moment, the lead bull suddenly discovered that the alpacas in front were gone, and then more than 20 of the large-horned deer that were running in the lead also disappeared. The lead bull was still running, and just as he was about to catch up with the large-horned deer, the scene in front of him made all the bull hair on his body stand on end. When did a deep and long ditch suddenly appear? Seeing this, you were overjoyed. You didn't expect that the artificial river you dug to transform the water fields would actually have such a wonderful use. This was probably a real pie falling from the sky. Now the leading bull was going crazy. There was definitely no way to cross the ditch in front of him. He could only stop abruptly, standing side by side, pointing their sharp bull horns outwards in unison. The wolf pack wrinkled their noses, bared their sharp teeth, and pressed closer step by step, gradually shrinking the encirclement. Just at this tense moment when a great battle was about to break out, a loud fart broke the pre-war calm. The bull herd and the wolf pack were all stunned. Hundreds of pairs of curious eyes turned in unison to look at the wall to the west. They saw a two-legged beast wearing a golden crown, slapping the head of a mammoth repeatedly with his palm. Damn it, I told you not to secretly eat chestnuts and fart. Now you're going to get us killed. Staring at the bull herd on this side, his eyes lit up, because there was no ditch near that wall. The wolf pack's eyes also lit up, because they had discovered food that was easier to catch than the bull herd. You suddenly noticed the strangeness in their eyes, and immediately ran back to the cave, shouting as you ran to grab the weapons and defend the cave entrance. The wall couldn't be relied on now. A half-meter thick, 3-meter-high brick wall was fine for defending against human attacks, but it was hard to say about a herd of mad bulls. The bull herd didn't understand what you were saying, and took the lead in launching a breakout. Heading straight for you, seeing the bull herd break out, the wolf pack's leader hurriedly issued an order for his underlings to drive the wild boars, to organize the first countercharge. The wild boar herd immediately rushed to the front. There was no other way. After all, they didn't have as many numbers as the others, and wanted to get a piece of the action in this hunt. So they had to act as the wolf pack's cannon fodder. The terror birds were different. They stayed on the periphery, taking advantage of any opportunity and running away if there wasn't one. Now that the way to survive was in front of them, how could the bull herd retreat? An unprecedented collision, like a collision between Mars and Earth, occurred. Over 100 wild ghouls, over 2 meters tall, and weighing over a ton, charged collectively. The wild boars, who usually looked fierce and invincible, were nothing more than a layer of paper in front of a bayonet. The half-meter-long bull horns impaled the wild boars, tearing them open. With just one encounter, dozens of wild boars were knocked away, smashing heavily into the Han tribe's wall behind them. The blue brick wall, frozen with ice water, couldn't withstand the continuous and violent impact, and collapsed with a crash. Meat Bun and Grey Mountain were so frightened that they ran to the cave entrance, retreating constantly, their butts almost blocking the cave entrance. The remaining dozen wild boars were so frightened that their livers and gallbladders were splitting, that they actually ran back into the wall, stepping on their companions' bodies. More than a dozen bulls also rushed in during the chaos. The two sides launched a great battle with just one encounter, instantly collapsing the pen's wall. The two blue horses in the shed, trembling with fright, became innocent victims, hit by the bull horns, and killed on the spot. You could only watch helplessly, as the family fortune you had worked so hard to accumulate was destroyed. Once such a prehistoric beast melee occurred, it couldn't be controlled by individual force. You could only barely manage to protect yourself and your tribesmen. In the chaotic collision, the pen collapsed, and more than a dozen blue horses that were tied up were crushed under the collapsed pen. The blue horses were trampled by the panicked wild boars and the mad bulls, and it was unknown how many of the blue horses below could survive. This made your heart ache. Those were all the ones you had brought back with great effort, outside the wall. Hundreds of wild bulls actually broke through the encirclement and ran towards the northeast of the Han tribe's back mountain. The scene of the wild boars being knocked away just now was still vivid in their minds. The wolf pack didn't dare to block them head-on. They could only tear at the isolated wild bulls on the periphery, biting more than 20 wild bulls to death. At this time, the wolf pack's leader also issued an order to stop the pursuit, and began to prepare to enjoy this feast. But you inside the wall were seeing red. All the blue horses you had brought back were dead. If you didn't take advantage of the opportunity to get some benefits, you would lose everything. You immediately called out all the adults in the tribe, and prepared to throw spears, to kill all the wild bulls and wild boars inside the wall. This was meat being delivered to their mouths. There was no reason not to take it. In the next moment, 70 or 80 people lined up in order at the cave entrance, and a rain of spears instantly covered the wild boars and wild bulls that were still wreaking havoc inside the wall. The sound of bronze spears entering flesh rang out, and more than 20 beasts fell to the ground on the spot, each with several spears planted in their bodies. Then you had the elder take the children to defend the cave entrance, while the others followed you to the collapsed part of the wall. There were still dozens of wild boars there that were half dead from being hit. Form ranks, the men in the front row for defense, the women in the back to finish them off. Kill all the wild boars, then drag them inside the wall. You stepped forward, holding the golden spear horizontally, vigilantly staring at the wolf pack in front. The Han tribe's dozen men stood on both sides of you, forming a horizontal line and raising their spears in defense. The women behind them held bronze spears, ruthlessly stabbing the fallen wild boars. For a time, the sounds of stabbing, the wails of the wild boars, and the shouts of the people emboldening themselves were endless. The situation here quickly attracted the attention of the wolf pack. Then, the wolf pack leader's howl rang out, and the wolf packs that were dividing up the wild bulls stopped their actions and looked at you with blood dripping from their mouths. A new battle was about to break out here. At this time, the sound of you leading the tribesmen to hunt the wild boars attracted the attention of the wolf pack. The wild wolves that were dividing up the wild bulls stopped their actions and looked at you with blood dripping from their mouths. At this time, you hurriedly shouted to order the tribesmen to contract their formation. Anyone who successfully killed a wolf would be rewarded with wolf skin and a longbow. Originally, the tribesmen were still afraid of the hundreds of wolves, but now their eyes were filled with fanaticism. Looking at the ferocious wolf pack in front of them, they seemed to see a mountain of fur walking towards them. In the next moment, the wolf pack leader's long howl gathered all the wolf packs into a charging formation and quickly ran towards the broken wall. You immediately took the lead in raising your spear, stabbing a vicious wolf that pounced over. With a theft, blood splattered everywhere. The previously ferocious hungry wolf immediately fell softly to the ground. The men on both sides also completed the first round of thrusts, leaving a dozen wolf corpses in front of the spear formation. Inside the wall, with the help of Meat Bun and Grey Mountain, all 50 wild boars had been annihilated. The women who had freed their hands also quickly joined the battle formation. Standing in the gaps between the men in the first row, the remaining women also stood in the second row with spears, ready to deal with unexpected situations at any time. The battle between the two sides had only been going on for a moment, and already more than 40 wolf corpses had piled up in front of the spear formation. Especially since the first row had doubled in number with the addition of the women. There was no pressure on the battlefield behind, but how could animals as cunning as grey wolves easily admit defeat in a place where everyone couldn't see? It directed another wolf to quietly outflank the wall, preparing to give these people in front of them a fatal blow. But this couldn't be hidden from you, who had been paying attention to the wolf pack leader's movements. Seeing the wolf pack leader's unusual movements, you climbed up the wall next to you in a few steps, observing the battlefield situation from a high position. On the front battlefield at the broken wall, more than 50 grey wolf corpses had piled up, blocking the front of the broken wall like a low wall. The wolf pack leader discovered that you had suddenly climbed onto the wall, and was worried that its plan to attack from the east and strike from the west would be discovered, so it howled again, ordering the charging team on the front battlefield to attack. One by one, elite grey wolves with large bodies stepped on their companions' corpses and leapt, attempting to directly cross the first layer of the spear formation and directly kill the second row behind. This sudden situation instantly attracted your attention. You quickly called for the first row to step forward, and the second row to defend the top of the first row, and at this moment, a grey wolf's scream suddenly came from the south wall. You turned your head to look, and couldn't help but widen your eyes. You saw inside the south wall, Meat Bun swinging its huge nose, constantly whipping the grey wolves that were trying to climb the wall. Seeing this, Grey Mountain also hurriedly imitated its actions, and fought side by side with Meat Bun. The front battlefield stabilized. Seeing that the attack was ineffective, the wolf pack leader could only have the wolf pack stop charging. Now it could only hope that the pair that was sneaking in from the side would have some success. Just then, a strong grey wolf stepped on its companions and leapt forcefully, and is about to cross the human wall. But suddenly an arrow flew out diagonally, hitting the grey wolf's neck right in the center. This frightened the grey wolf, who was still preparing to follow suit. And then several arrows flew out in quick succession. Directly defeat the wolf's sneak attack this time. Seeing that the attack was hopeless in both directions, the wolf pack leader didn't dare to continue attacking, and immediately let out a deafening howl, hurriedly withdrawing its troops. and turning to continue dividing up the wild bull carcasses outside. But how could you let them go? So many blue horses had died. How could you swallow this? You then issued a series of orders, ordering the men to continue to be vigilant, the women to drag the grey wolf corpses in front of the broken wall into the wall, and also dividing up several women, to make torches with firewood and lard. You also had the elder take out the remaining feather arrows in stock. A dozen minutes later, Meatbun carried all the usable ropes in the tribe on its back. Grey Mountain had your quiver hanging around its neck, and carried you on its back. Surrounded by 30 adult tribesmen holding torches and spears, walking towards those fallen wild bulls, arriving near a wild bull carcass. You first shot arrows from 30 meters away, killing several wolves. And the other grey wolves didn't dare to continue staying there, and fled to other places one after another. You took the opportunity to lead people there and occupy a cow carcass. Let the tribesmen put ropes around the cow's head, then let Ruba and Hushan drag it back. In this way, they made trip after trip to transport. When coming out from the enclosure, they also dragged out a large group of wolves by the way. Because they had witnessed the power of the copper spears and bows and arrows, and each tribesman still held a torch in their hand, the wolves could only watch as these humans dragged away their prey. Even the terror birds that were pecking at the wild cows in the distance were all shot and killed by you with a bow and arrow from a long distance. All of them became the prey of the Han tribe. Forced into a corner, the wolves could only shift their gaze to the living creatures that had fallen into the ditch. But before they could launch another attack, a raging fire blazed up along the banks of the entire man-made river. The wolves' last hope was also dashed, so they had to retreat reluctantly back into the forest. And on the banks of the man-made river, you and the tribesmen held torches to inspect this harvest. In the 700-meter-long river ditch, there were 36 alpacas, 28 giant elks, 47 wild cows of various sizes, and 7 or 8 grey wolves that had been trampled to death, and an ostrich with a broken leg. Now it was just a matter of figuring out how to get them out. To get all these living livestock, it would take a lot of time, but you were still very worried that the wolves that had hidden in the forest would come out and launch a surprise attack. So you led Ruba and Hushan, and dragged 2 wild boars to the edge of the forest. After more than an hour of toiling, all the scattered beast carcasses outside were dragged back into the enclosure. It was already midnight. Now the tribesmen were all extremely tired. In order to give everyone the strength to work next, you asked several women to slaughter a wild boar and make supper for everyone. Each person got a large piece of roasted meat. And the broth was unlimited. This was the first fresh roasted meat that everyone had eaten since the beginning of winter 3 months ago. There was a smile on everyone's face. The men also proudly boasted about how many grey wolves they had killed just now, and how many rewards they could get after the meal. It was almost dawn. You divided more than 70 adults into 4 teams. One team of 10 people took turns standing on the enclosure wall, responsible for vigilance and patrol. Another team of 20 people was responsible for repairing the enclosure and the livestock pen. The remaining more than 40 people followed you outside the enclosure with tools. First, you arranged for 6 people to dig an upward slope on the north side of the man-made river with copper shovels. This ramp could only accommodate 1 livestock to pass through. Once it was on this ramp, it could never turn around. More than 30 other people built wooden fences under your command. As soon as the livestock below came up, they would enter this narrow wooden fence passage. You also brought a temporary stove and lit charcoal in it, inserted 2 copper hooks into the charcoal stove to heat them up. After making all the preparations, 2 people brought a bundle of forage to lure the animals in the river channel to come towards the ramp. These herbivores were cold and hungry at this time. As soon as they saw a bundle of hay, they immediately got up and climbed up to the ground along the ramp. Once they were on the ground, it was easy to handle. Several people put a rope around them and directly led them into the enclosure and tied them up, waiting for arrangements. As soon as the last bull that came up showed its head on the ramp, Several people immediately blocked its way in front and behind with wooden sticks. You immediately took the red-hot copper hook and put a nose ring on it. The raging bull immediately became as docile as a quail, letting the tribesmen lead it into the enclosure. This work was not finished until the afternoon. All the dead and living things in the entire river channel were taken out. All the harvest was counted. A total of 97 heads of the 3 kinds of living livestock were captured. There were a total of 45 dead wild cows, 52 wild boars, 17 giant elks, 113 gray wolves, and 14 terror birds that were shot and killed by bows and arrows, plus the blue horses that were affected in the livestock shed. All of them were killed, fortunately, during this big scuffle. The rabbit pen was miraculously preserved. After a busy day, in the evening, all the damages had been completely repaired. The 3 sides of the enclosure were raised by 5 layers of blue bricks, to prevent those gray wolves from jumping in from the outside again. In the open space inside the enclosure, the crackling sound of wood burning, and the laughter and chatter of the Han tribe could be heard. More than 100 people were working hard around the campfire. Some women were boasting to others that they had skinned a wolf before, and that they would teach everyone how to skin it in person. Mutong was using a handsaw to saw the horns of those dead cows. Signaling, several boys traded from the Black Rat tribe to watch carefully. They would also be allowed to try later. The children held large pieces of roasted meat in their hands and sang songs that you couldn't understand. They were very happy, because the food was unlimited today, and you were standing in the middle of the open space, looking at the tribesmen who had been working hard for a day and a night, and still didn't seem to be tired. You couldn't help but feel a little worried. There was only a little more than a month left of winter, when the weather got warmer. What should be done with the meat that couldn't be eaten up? It simply couldn't be preserved. The work of skinning and cutting the meat continued until midnight, but the tribesmen's eyes were red from exhaustion, and they still didn't know how to rest. They were really happy. In the end, there was really no other way. You could only force them to rest. The next day, as soon as it dawned, the tribesmen who had only rested for half a night got up full of energy. You could only arrange new work for them. First, you asked the lame man to lead the Zui and Hausi to make 42 cow nose rings. Then you asked the men to dig 2 small pools and pour water with wood ash in them to tan more than 200 pieces of animal hides. The remaining tribesmen continued to dissect the meat. Dashu led several people to sort out the cow horns and tendons. And you called over 3 adult men from the original Zeeting tribe. Where did you get the salt stones that you used to trade with us before? Chief, the salt stones were obtained from a small cave in our mountain cave. Every time, it was the children of 3 or 4 years old who went in. We adults have never seen it before. You answered very well. You will lead the way when we go to look for it next time, considering those wolves that were still lurking in the jungle by the stream. You planned to go and collect some more salt later. Now that you already knew where there was a salt mine, there was no need to worrying about lacking salt anymore. You directly asked people to take out all the stockpiled salt and started to teach them how to make cured meat and sausages. At the same time, Shudar and the shaman of the Rat tribe and their group had rushed back to the tribe in a hurry. Regarding your reminder, both of them attached great importance to it. The 2 senior leaders discussed for a while, and finally decided that Shudar would lead a hunting team of 20 people to explore carefully, to see if it was really as you said, while he himself would stay in the tribe to command the women to build a fence enclosure for defense. He even learned from the Han tribe, and made a horse barrier with wooden stakes and stone spears as the gate. The tribesmen used the traded pottery to cook the broth. While eating, they also discussed in a low voice, if only we could also be traded to the Han tribe. These words reached the ears of the shaman of the Rat tribe. He didn't get angry either. He just closed his eyes and kept thinking about the words you had said in his mind. As long as they joined the Han tribe, there would be an endless supply of food, an endless supply of animal hides to wear, and a safe place to live. This voice kept rising up in the shaman of the Rat tribe's heart, making his head feel dizzy. Suddenly, he opened his eyes fiercely and said excitedly, Our tribe is no smaller than the Han tribe. Why should we join them? Didn't that Han chief say that he could make the soil produce an endless supply of food? Let's wait and see. What if what he said wasn't true? Just then, Shudar led the hunting team back. He entered the tent with a large string of human bone necklaces in his hand. Shaman, look at these. They were found on the frozen bodies in the forest. The shaman of the rat tribe nodded repeatedly upon hearing this. It seemed that what they said was true. For a moment, both of them fell silent, not knowing what to do. After a while, the shaman of the rat tribe said to Shudar, "In the past 2 days, I also asked the tribesmen to build an enclosure. If those cannibals really come to attack us, do you think we can hold them off? No. Those fences can even be climbed over by children." The shaman of the rat tribe let out a helpless sigh, then arranged more people to keep watch, and asked the women and children to make more weapons. If that day really comes and we can't beat them, we'll deal with it then. If only we had more people. Shudar nodded, and was about to get up and go out to arrange the work. But suddenly he seemed to think of something. "I have an idea that can give us more people." Upon hearing this, the shaman of the rat tribe, his eyes immediately lit up. "Hurry up and tell me, what's the idea?" "Do you remember the Lee tribe that guards the chestnut forest? They must also need these pottery. We can use these pottery to trade for people with them. The Han tribe traded with us. They exchanged 1 pottery bowl for 2 underage boys, or 1 adult woman. Then we'll double it. Exchange a pottery bowl for 2 women of the Lee tribe, or for boys, then use these people we traded for to trade with the Han tribe again. We'll keep the extra people for ourselves." After hearing this, the shaman of the rat tribe was immediately delighted. "So trading could be done like this. You're really a genius. Even you, who were far away on the west bank of the small river, didn't expect that in primitive society, the first middleman who made a profit from the price difference was born just like this. Just use this method. You lead people and go to the Lee tribe right away. Just use the pottery bowls we traded for to trade with them." The shaman of the rat tribe quickly instructed. Shudar agreed and hurried out to make preparations. And on the side of the Han tribe, you were thinking about what method to use to get rid of those wolves. Those wolves had been hiding in the forest and not coming out. Now the salt in the tribe was only enough for 200 people for 1 month. It wasn't a good idea to keep like this. You thought and thought. It was impossible to go out and fight. If you took too few people, they would just be like food for the wolves. Just then, the voice of Jakubing came from outside the cave. "Stop being disobedient. Be honest and don't move around." At this time, the lame man and Dolly were putting nose rings on the wild cows. The wild cows were a bit restless because of the pain. Jakubing held a thorny vine and pretended to be fierce and whipped the cows' butts from behind. Your eyes suddenly lit up, and you suddenly had an idea in your mind. You laughed loudly and went outside to collect thorny vines. These vines were about the thickness of a finger, and were covered with very hard thorns. They were just right for making a deadly trap. Then soak them in cold water and freeze them. When a layer of ice formed on them, the thorns were all wrapped inside. Finally, smear a thick layer of lard on the outside. As soon as this thing was swallowed by the wolves into their stomachs, the ice layer on it would melt in the stomach. Then those thorny vines would pierce through their stomachs, and then they would surely die. At noon that day, first, you rode Hushan to the edge of the forest, and threw some animal entrails, giving them a little benefit first, to numb the wolves' vigilance. By the evening, what was fed to them was the real deadly package. Thorny vines wrapped in ice and lard. They filled several large baskets, and were scattered all over the edge of the forest by the stream. Now you just had to wait for those grey wolves to fall into the trap. Thinking of those fluffy wolf skins, you couldn't help but look forward to it even more.